readers and readers, I'm Christy Stratus, and today I'm talking about the best fantasy book subgenre reading challenge, specifically mundane fantasy. So mundane fantasy, from what I understand from bestfantasybooks.com, is supposed to be basically a mundane world with no fantastical or magical elements, but fantastical and magical elements can work their way in. So to me, I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I did start reading The Burning Man, which is part of the Kingdom of the Serpent. This is actually book 2 of the series by Mark Chadbourne. And I chose book 2 because I had read that it is on bestfantasybooks.com that it was a very good example of mundane fantasy. There's a section before the prologue called The Final Age, and this section is really pretty necessary to read because it tells you what happens in the first book. It is extremely dense because there's a lot to pack in. So I had started reading it, and frankly, because it was so dense and there was so much to figure out and understand, a lot of different terms to grasp, so many different names, I actually ended up skipping it because it was just too much for me to take in and I was wasting a lot of time trying to figure out what everything meant. So I skipped on to the next prologue. It's called A Semi-Charmed Life, and it kind of locates the different characters who I think were in the first book and shows you where they are, kind of sets the stage, and then the actual book begins in chapter 1. And the nice thing is that this book has short chapters, and I really, really like that. I like either short chapters or nice sections, you know, where it's a little bit easier to read and then leave off instead of these like really long chapters that are hard to keep track of and hard to remember where you left off and you have to stop in the middle of one and all that. So I like the format of this, but the thing was, it just wasn't for me. So I think it would probably be a good example of mundane fantasy because the basic idea from what I understood from the book description and from what I did read of the book, which was probably around 50 pages or so, I understood that there was some kind of fantastical world. I don't know if it used to be Earth or what it was, but there is a mundane spell on the Earth. I believe that's what it is. And so these characters need to break that spell. I think that's the premise. And again, I'm sorry if I mix it up because I didn't read enough of it to really tell if that's completely true or not. I think that that would be a very good mundane fantasy example, but the thing was, for me, I really didn't like the characters, even in just these beginning parts. They were not characters that I could really stick with. The way they spoke, the way they acted, irritated me right off the bat. That's just my taste. I know that probably a ton of people really like this author and the series, and maybe if I tried a different series by this author, I'd really like it. But it just, in this particular book, I didn't care for the characters, and you know, sometimes I can accept that and move on, but I didn't really like the terminology that was in there either. So some of the fantastical types of terminology, you know, there were names for armies, like there's a 10 billion spider army, something like that, and that's really gross because it was literal, and I was thinking that maybe it wasn't literal and it was just, you know, a name for some creepy army of some sort or another that was maybe a drone type of thing, but it's literally spiders, which is absolutely disgusting. I hate spiders, totally gross, so I didn't like that at all. They have like an airship type of thing that's called the Fabulous Beast. And there were like a bunch of other things. I just didn't care for the terminology, and it wasn't my thing. So I stopped reading this book, but I can't say whether I recommend it or not because those really are just my taste. And there's this one author out there that has like a ton of best-selling books, and I had this similar problem with. I read one of the types of creatures, and it was just, to me, it was too fake. It sounded too fake to me. Now, other people probably would read it and say, oh, that sounds really good. And maybe one of the reasons is because I really like things that are believable and very more realistic or logical, or that can be explained and make sense, even though they're fantasy or magic. And I'm sure there are a lot of fantasy readers that are more interested in something that completely takes them away from real life, and it's just a whole other world, to the degree that you can even have these kinds of monsters or worlds or something that aren't believable, and that could be attractive to some people. But for me, that's a big turnoff, and that's the reason that I didn't continue with this book and I didn't finish it. But if you have read this book, again, it's The Burning Man, or if you've read anything in the Kingdom of the Serpent series or anything by Mark Chadbourne, let me know in the comments. I would love to know what you thought of it, and if this is a book you really like, what you liked about it. Let me know what you think about the idea of it being in the mundane fantasy subgenre. And if you like this video, please hit like below and subscribe. I will continue to do these videos whether I like the book or I don't like the book, and whether I read the whole book or not. I'll still let you know what I think of them and how they fit into the subgenre. So thanks for spending some time with me.